Welcome to Chapter 7 of the Washington State Beekeepers Association Beginner Beekeeper Certification, where we will look at the honey flow. There are two sections in this chapter where we will answer two important questions that the beekeeper should be able to answer, and they are: when is the honey flow on? And what flowering plants are available for the bees, and when do they bloom? The honey flow comes on when the flowers produce the most amount of nectar. Normally, this will depend on the weather and the time of year. While the bees can bring in nectar almost any time, there are two times when the nectar flow is large. The first is normally between mid-June and the end of July, and the second is early fall in preparation for winter. Because we can't really see the bees bringing the nectar in, the only real way to know when the nectar flow is on is to weigh your hive. This is done by monitoring the weight of your hive as it grows. At the beginning of the nectar flow, you will notice that the hive will significantly gain weight and that the flow stops when it plateaus and begins to lose weight. Talking to gardeners and other beekeepers is a good way of learning what blooms and when. This information is valuable because it gives you the bees' food source throughout the season. When necessary, the bees will fly 3 to 5 miles to forage if there is no available nectar or pollen source nearby. For this reason, it is very important that we know when and what vegetation is growing in our immediate area for the bees. Today, we're going to look at 8 different plant groups that the bees use for food. The first group consists of the early pollen producers, in which the bees need the pollen for brood rearing in the early spring. They are the pussy willow, the early maple, and the alders. Next, we have our orchard plants, which consist of fruit trees. These trees supply both nectar and pollen, but they only bloom for slightly more than a week and often bloom when the temperature is not ideal for the bees to fly. The largest group of flowering plants is the flower garden. The number of flower garden plants enjoyed by honeybees are almost limitless. Depending on the soil condition, some of these flowers are easy to grow and others can be quite challenging. Knowing your growing conditions, including your zone in which you live, the acidity or amount of clay in your soil, if the plant is drought or deer resistant if necessary, are very important questions to know. The other factors to consider is if you enjoy the flowers and if you prefer annuals or perennials. Choosing bee-friendly plants not only encourage honeybee foraging, but they also support native pollinators as well. Man's favorite flowering plants are found in the vegetable garden. While herbs are the favorite of the bees, letting vegetables bolt, flower, and go to seed instead of picking off their heads allow the bees to collect both nectar and pollen. The bees favor late summer and early fall corn and sunflowers for pollen. Trees and bushes, including flowering trees and shrubs in your garden, provides a variety of nectar and pollen sources. Alfalfa, sweet clover, and sunflowers provide a good source of nectar throughout the summer. While we constantly battle to keep our weeds cut back, most of the plants that we call weeds have a high content of nectar. And to draw a different face on weeds, the ones that are classified as noxious weeds in some areas like blackberries, Japanese knotweed, Russian olives, and many more are beneficial to the bees. One person's weed is another bee's treasure. And last but not least, the native plants. The benefit of the native plants are that we know where they grow and when they will return. These plants are also more acclimated to the environment in which they grow and often produce nectar with little water. While to some, the blackberry may be considered a noxious weed, it produces the largest nectar flow in western Washington. And if the weather is cold or dry during the bloom, the flowers produce almost no nectar.